Hey everyone, welcome to the second season of Sentient the podcast. I am Ranveer Kapoor, your host, and with me is Atharva Patil. Why don't you introduce yourself, Atharva?
So I'm Atharva Patil from SYBSC Xaviers, and I will be the co-host along with Ranveer for this season of Sentient. And with me is a cat and the blessings of God and his halo. It's Halo. I don't really get. Yeah, let's start.
Okay, first of all, the theme of the podcast this season is it's about talking about whatever we have understood during the process of learning or being taught physics. So in simpler words, it's de-abstractifying the concepts of physics during like whatever goes on in our mind when we are being taught or when we are learning it by ourselves. And that's what we are going to talk about. And since our first exposure to formal physics was with the concepts of dynamics and motion, we will start the first few episodes with the concepts of motion.
Concepts of dynamics and motion.
Concepts of dynamics and motion, right? And so, where do we start from? I think the philosophical background, right? Aristotle and all, you know,
Yeah. So Aristotle, very old Greek dude, did lots of philosophy. Was influenced by Plato,
metaphysics.
I'm sure.
No, dude,
Metaphysics.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's the other way around.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and ethics and yeah, and Plato students, lots of Plato in him, and shit, that sounds strange, but whatever. So yeah, but uh, also a bit of a scientist. He's regarded by some people as the first scientist ever.
yep.
And so what he proposed was we could call it interesting right now in modern physics. Was that due to the natural state of any body is to be at rest, and yes, I'm paraphrasing him, but this was a gist of it. वो बोला कि जो कोई भी बॉडी है वो एक स्थिर हो जाएगा, which
So
is a
you
very
mean to say that anything happens to a body, after everything, it'll just stay. It'll
yeah,
just come to rest.
anything with respect to its motion. So
Yeah.
this was a very obviously you can say that this is a very intuitive law that he proposed, because he saw that anything is at rest. When I push it, a ball, let's say a ball for no reason, because a ball is easier to move. We push it, the ball rolls, and it comes to rest. It will never roll on forever. Of course, at that point, he did not take in consideration that the ground might be doing something to the ball to
Of course.
stop it from moving.
That's
But this
that's
was
all
only
he
how
had.
he
It's
saw.
very intuitive indeed. Yeah.
Very intuitive.
Right. Which
Very,
is
very
wrong.
intuitive, right?
Yeah, Galileo came with his thought experiments and with his physical experiments as well. And he was the first person who hypothesized that the natural state of the body isn't just rest; it is motion, but somehow it just comes to rest. And this was later proved by Newton, and Newton did a lot of stuff. Anyway, Galileo also had a very, very interesting thought experiment, which goes on like this: take a ship, let it move on a very smooth sea, like ideally smooth sea,
Yes,
nothing,
still waters, completely still waters,
just
like a mirror, you can say.
exactly like a mirror, and there's nothing around it, so it's just gray in color. It looks like in Life of Pi, it's just there. Anyway, so it's moving in that water, and there's a person on the deck, and that person, when he looks at the ship, he won't be able to understand if the ship is moving or not. And when he looks out at the sea, because it's completely smooth, he won't be able to understand if the ship is moving or not again. And
Yeah.
why
So
is that happening?
yeah,
Because
so we can understand this by relating it to our own everyday experiences. Like the only reason that you know that you are moving is that you see everything around you going backwards to you, backwards with respect to you as you move forward or in the direction that you're moving.
right,
This is and so you could say that the only reason you know or you perceive motion is with respect to something else, relative to something else. Relative
exactly,
being
yeah.
the key word here.
So in a sense, we when we perceive motion, we put something with respect to us. We take something as our reference, and when it moves, we understand that we are moving with respect to it, or it is moving with respect to us, and as you said, relative to us, and that's where Galilean relativity comes from. So, in like putting some technicality into it, we could understand this in the following way: that if we put like every observer has an observing instrument. For example, our eyes are an observing instrument, and if we put a coordinate system in our eyes, we will take anything to our reference, anything like any object, and we will know its position according to that coordinate system, and we will know the orientation of that coordinate system as well. And if that thing moves, we will know that its position is changing in the coordinate system, and we will know its velocity, we will know its acceleration, we'll know everything about it. So in a
We'll
sense,
rather determine everything about it
we'll rather
as
determine everything about it. Exactly.
yeah.
So, in a sense, if the object is moving with respect to that coordinate system, we will understand that the object is moving because that's our inbuilt coordinate system. And that's what it actually is. Our mind already has an inbuilt coordinate system, and that's why we could perceive things as moving. And it's very, it's very beautiful in a sense that whatever, whatever classical mechanics is, stems from this
Yeah, it
very
stems from
idea.
the human experience.
Exactly, it just stems from this very idea, and this idea is called reference frames. So
Yeah. So reference frames. In a very informal way, reference frame is कि तेरा आँख ले और किधर तो चिपका दे. When you do that, that like as you perceive, your eyes become that object's eyes, and that object will perceive things as you perceive. Like that object remain at rest, it will detect things that are moving around it, and hence it will detect motion around it.
of course, yeah.
What we do uh, with reference frames is very similar. These eyes are the coordinate system fixed to that body, to that object, to that observer, in the sense that any point on the coordinate system with respect to the observer will always remain at the same
It's the
distance
same
or the same
distance.
orientation
Yeah,
with respect to the observer always.
of course.
Never will it change. That's the reference frame, and hence by that coordinate system, the object or the observer will understand motion around it as and when it happens.
So exactly. So in a sense, it's inbuilt in our mind because it's just there. We could understand wherever something is going and wherever,
Yeah, like
how
this is
fast
not,
it's going.
yeah, this is not something very revolutionary, but yeah, this was very important. This is a very important tool in understanding motion.
Because that's where the equations of motions come
Yeah,
from. That's where
because
relativity
if you
stems
think
from.
about this a little more, you will understand that there is actually uh, nothing by which you can absolutely perceive motion.
Exactly.
Something will have to move for that for anything for any motion to be perceived with
Right.
respect to another frame. So motion is always relative.
Exactly. Griffiths made
Uh,
written that if we know the position of an object at any point, we can we can tell everything about its motion. So you're getting my point. So if we have the
yeah,
equation for an object's position at any point of time, we can tell what its
yeah.
velocity is, what its
In very
acceleration is.
mathematical terms, differentiate once to get the velocity, differentiate
Exactly.
twice to get the
That's what we're
acceleration.
doing, and that's all classical mechanics is all about. So, in a sense,
Yeah,
it's in classical mechanics is inbuilt in our
it's
mind.
calculus.
It's calculus indeed, and yeah,
So Newton was, as we established, a very important person in the development of classical physics, classical mechanics, the important numbers mechanics. Uh, his three laws, as we have all studied, are basically describe how force and motion interact.
basically just everything in classical mechanics because
Yeah,
everything
everything.
just stems from it, right?
Yeah,
So,
everything stems from everything.
yeah,
You can describe everything from those laws themselves. Uh, but all of these can be understood
through frames of
or are
reference.
very helpful to the two lens of reference frames
Yeah,
and inertial reference frames.
because that's what starts in, right? So inertial frames of reference are basically just frames of reference which aren't accelerating at all, and which are just either at rest or constant at a constant velocity.
which is
And
also rest with respect to that frame, as we have
of
discussed
course,
earlier
yeah,
at Galileo's ship.
right.
Uh,
And would you like to touch on Newton's first law, Tharwa?
yeah. So Newton's first law. Newton's first law basically just says that the statement, again, I am not defining it, I'm paraphrasing it, is that any object will remain in that state of motion if no other force acts on it. That means it can be in rest or it can be at in constant velocity. At a certain velocity in a certain direction, the direction is also important. In a certain direction at the same speed or at rest, which now you know that
I don't
Newton
think
said
I
it
don't
is
think
two
you
different
should
terms.
say force right now because that's essentially
Why?
described in the second law. You could just say influence, maybe. So what it says is that unless a body is in influence of anything outside or inside it, if it's at motion, it will stay at motion. If it's at rest, it will stay at rest. Right. And
Yeah,
in terms of inertial frames of reference, it simply means that inertial frames of references exist because we have seen there are bodies which will keep on moving if they aren't in any influence from their environment or from their own insides. So
yes.
they
So
will
when an object state of motion is not changing or it is continuously at rest,
they are in an
that means
inertial
any
frame.
frame of reference, they themselves are inertial frames of reference.
Exactly. So
This term inertia was never really explained. So inertia is just the tendency of an object to stay at rest, uh,
if it's
or
at
keep
rest,
in or keep in the same direction, or be in the same state of motion and the same direction, which is
right?
elaborated in the second law. Ranveer.
Exactly. And you forgot saying one thing, that if it's influenced by something, it will always resist that influence to move or to stay at rest or to change
Yes,
directions.
yeah, that
So
is inertia.
that's what inertia is. And Newton's second law talks more about inertia because it um, defines a quantity called force, which is used to accelerate an object. That is, if it's if an object is moved from rest or if it's moved from a certain constant velocity, it requires force, which is basically countering that resistance the inertia of the body exerts. And that's what force is. And it also clarifies a concept called mass, because mass is basically in a sense it is it's just a quantification of an inertia of a body. It's like de-abstractifying it again, and that's what mass is. And it's more clarified in the second law because it has a mathematical definition to it now. F is equal to ma. That's force is dependent on the inertia of the body, and sorry, the acceleration is dependent on the inertia of the body and the influence it gets from anywhere. So, and that influence
Yes.
is called force. F is equal to ma.
So I would like to clarify a little bit on inertia. We say it's the tendency of that object, which basically just means the same force on an object with less inertia will have more of an effect. That is, the body will tend to align itself, its position, its movement or its motion in the direction of the force more than or more easily than that of an object with more
With
inertia.
more inertia.
Which now that you know that mass is a measure of inertia, तुमरे को पता है ना कि अगर भारी ऑब्जेक्ट है उसको तो उतना ही फोर्स लगा तो उसको ज्यादा फोर्स लगता है उतना ही मूव करवाने
Of
को
course, yeah.
compared to a lighter object. Like
Exactly, and that's what
I can move this kitten essay easily, but the table in front of me requires a lot more force for me to take it to this height and drop it again. Now you can sleep. Sorry,
also
Ranveer.
please let her sleep anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, that and she fell off my lap, but now she's back.
anyway, it's
She's
fine.
stable.
Inertia.
She is in rest relative to me. So yeah,
Bad joke.
uh, so it is rather than saying that it is the tendency of an object. It just means ki, how much effect a force will have on that object is defined by inertia compared to an object with lesser inertia.
Exactly, and so
That's it.
that's where the second law comes. And So we clarified both force and mass, and force basically influences. It's less vague now, right? So, and mass is basically inertia, but it's now a quantity instead of an abstract concept. And
Yes.
yeah, that's all the second law is. Now we need to understand it. We need to understand the third law, which is basically if we apply force on a body, we could experience a similar and opposite force on ourselves, which is basically the resistance we get by hampering the inertia of a body. Is it?
Yes. It's the same way in which you can experience it very clearly when you have an object with a much higher inertia than you. Let's say uh, I slap Ranveer. Ranveer moves, which has less mass than me, will move away. It is even more clarified when I take my hand and just swing it towards a wall. It will bounce back better. It'll or not bounce back better. It'll hit me more, right? Because it has more inertia. So
Right.
the force, like instead of it moving, uh, the same force that I've applied on it bounces back on my hand. It affects the atoms on my hand, and that is literally the sensation of pain, the heat that it feels. But that is energy, so this is a very different topic. But yeah, my hand, it causes my hand to move away. That's the takeaway from this. That is third law of
Exactly.
Newton.
The wall
If you
doesn't
slap
move because
someone, your
it.
hand also moves away. You
Exactly.
are also
Because.
slapped, by the way.
Anyway.
Your hand is slapped.
Yeah. Thank you, Newton. So, in a sense, the wall has more inertia than your hand. So your hand moves, but the wall doesn't because it's very, very massive instead, like compared to your hand. And that's what the third law is. So we could, if we apply mathematics to it, we could take if we could think of two bodies applying force to each other, we could understand it in the way that we could take each body's the forces on each body, and we could draw different diagrams of the forces of the body. And
Yeah,
I think in that body's frame of reference, we could assign the forces that are acting on the body. You get my point?
yeah. That is drawing a free body diagram. Because
Exactly, that's what the free body
if the
diagram
body
is.
is applying a force on something, you know that another equal and opposite force is being applied on the body itself.
Right, so
It
it
is
can be acted as a force on your hand if you're slapping the wall, and
yeah,
that is a completely different force according to your frame of reference. So
yeah.
that's all the third law of Newton is. Now, I think, Atharva, it's time to leave on the audience that how we could relate the second law of Newton to both mathematically and physically to frames of reference, because I think there's a very deep connection between them, and wrap it up for now.
Yeah, and the third law, I'd like to just point out, is independent from frames of reference. It is just the nature of things.
Exactly, it is the nature of things. We could just separate our forces. That's all the free body diagram does.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
so
thank you for listening, and bye.
see you next time.
Next time.
Bye bye.